Hello learners and welcome to today's episode of Foreign Trade. This episode will tell you about the various international economic institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization and the World Bank. I am Dr. Sumbul Zaman, PhD in Human Resource Management from the Center for Management Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi, and I am into teaching. Learners, we have already covered GATT, UNCTAD and the various aspects of International Monetary Fund in the earlier episode. So, I begin my lecture with the various resources of IMF. The resources of International Monetary Fund come from the subscription by members and by the borrowings. Now, in case if the resources are coming through the subscription by the members, then each member of IMF is required to subscribe an equivalent amount to its quota. Now, the member is assigned a quota expressed in the special drawing rights, that is the SDRs, and a member's quota reflects its economic size. These quotas determine the voting power of members, their contribution and access to the fund's resources. They also tell about their share in the allocation of SDRs. It is the Board of Governors who decides on how the proportion would be paid, that is whether the SDRs or in the member's currency. A member is generally required to pay 25% of its quota in the SDRs, and these quotas are reviewed at an interval of about 5 years. Now, in case of the resources coming from the borrowings, the bulk of the financial resources come from the quota subscription of the member countries. They also come through selling gold to the member countries, the central banks, the private entities or the organization of the petroleum exporting countries or the OPEC countries. Now, the IMF entered into an agreement under the General Agreement to Borrow, that is GAB, in 1962, and under this the IMF borrows from 11 industrialized members to cope with the impairment of the international monetary system. The IMF also established the new arrangements to borrow, that is NAB, in 1997 for further supplementing the resources. There has been an increase in the facilities under which the fund provides financial assistance since 1970s, and these facilities have been liberalized by raising the quota limits. They have also excluded drawings under special facilities while determining the amount. These facilities are reserve tranche drawings. Now, if the member has less currency available with the IMF than its quota, then the difference is called a reserve tranche. Reserve tranche is a temporary assistance of lending funds to the member countries to finance the disequilibrium in their balance of payment. It refers to the member's right to draw up to 25% on its reserves upon representation to the IMF. Also, there are no charges for purchases in the reserve tranche. The credit tranche facilities. Under this facility, a member can draw further annually from the balance quota in 4 installments. It can draw up to 100% from the credit tranches. However, drawing from the credit tranches is conditional, as the members have to satisfy the IMF. They can do so by adopting a viable program to show financial stability. Now, the IMF, to meet the severe BOP problems, has been raising the limit of borrowings by members under credit tranche. The IMF since 1960s has created several new credit facilities. These facilities are the Extended Fund Facility, or the EFE 1974, which was created in 1974 to provide credit to member countries to meet their balance of payment deficits. It provides credit to a period of 10 years and loans up to 300% of the members' quota. It is availed by developing countries and is based on two things, that is the performance criteria and the drawing installments. The buffer stock financing facility, which was created in 1969 for financing commodity buffer stocks by the member countries. Now, the facility is equal to 30% of the borrowings of the members' quota, and the repurchases take place at 3% up to a period of 5 years. The supplementary financing facility, which was created in 1977 to provide supplementary financing to member countries to meet the BOP deficits. It has also extended to low-income developing countries. The structural adjustment facility, which was set up in 1986 to provide concessional adjustments to the poorer developing countries. Now, under these facilities, the fund provides resources at concessional terms to low income countries, and they are the ones who are facing balance of payment problems. This facility also provides to carry out medium term macroeconomic programs as well as structural adjustment programs or SAP. The member develops and updates a medium term policy with the help of IMF and World Bank experts. Now, this framework is for a period of 3 years, and it is the form of a policy framework paper that are supported by SAP. Enhanced Structural Adjustment Facility, that is the ESAF, and this was created in 1987 for medium term financing needs of the low income countries. Its eligibility and basic features resemble SAP. However, ESAF arrangements differ from the SAP arrangements in the scope and the strength of the structural policies. They also differ in terms of the access levels, monitoring procedures and the sources of funding. Systematic Transformation Facility or STF, which was created in 1993 to help Russia and other Central Asian republics to face the balance of payment crisis. The contingency credit lines, which was created to protect fundamentally sound countries from the contagion of financial crisis. The IMF advises its member countries on various problems, and these problems may be concerned with the balance of payments, the exchange rates, monetary and fiscal issues. The IMF has set up 3 departments to solve the monetary and fiscal problems, and they are the Central Banking Service Department, Fiscal Affairs Department and the International Monetary Fund Institute. However, IMF has been criticized for mishandling the global financial crisis, especially in East Asia and Latin America. It is said to have encouraged bad policies by the government and the financial investors. It has also been blamed for favoring the developed nations. Apart from this, IMF has been criticized for high interest rates, lack of resources, failure to maintain the exchange rate stability, failure to eliminate the foreign exchange restrictions and discriminatory politics. An important concept that you all must know is that of the special drawing right, that is the SDRs. The special drawing right or the SDR is international reserve assets or the reserve money in the international monetary system. It was established in 1969 to alleviate the problem of international liquidity. The SDR is defined as a composite of 5 currencies: the dollar, mark, franc, yen and pound. They are allocated to the member countries in proportion to their quota subscriptions. Only the IMF members can participate in the SDR facility. The IMF operates through 2 accounts, that is the general account and the special drawing account. Now, the general account uses the national currencies to conduct businesses of the IMF, while the special drawing account is transacted by the SDRs. The SDRs are often called paper gold, which is a book entry in the special drawing account of the IMF. Now, when the paper gold is allocated, it gets a credit entry in the name of the participating country. The SDRs, once allocated to a member, are owned by it and are used to overcome the balance of payment deficits. We had been discussing IMF till now. Let's talk of another international economic institution, that is the World Trade Organization or the WTO. The world economies became globalized in trade and business in 1980s, and this was the time when GATT could not address many of the new global trading challenges. This resulted in the biggest trade negotiating event in the year 1986. The Uruguay round of GATT took place between 1986 and 1993, and it gave birth to World Trade Organization. The members of GATT signed an agreement on the Uruguay round in April 1994 in Morocco for establishing a new organization named the World Trade Organization, that is the WTO. It was officially constituted on January 1st, 1995, and thus the WTO became a successor to the GATT. WTO attained a legal status and it had 77 members in 1995 that had later increased to 128. WTO is a properly established rule-based organization, and the decisions of WTO on the agreements are time-bound. It covers the trade of goods and services. It also covers the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. The WTO educates and informs the companies and the governments on the acceptable rules that govern trade. It facilitates fair and smooth conduct of businesses across the international borders by the countries and the producers of goods and services. This is facilitated by the WTO agreements, which are negotiated and signed by a large majority of the trading nations in the world. Now, these documents may provide a legal framework for conducting business among the nations. The WTO is headed by the ministerial conferences, and it comprises of representatives of all the members. Now, these members meet at least once in every 2 years, and it consists of a general council that is composed of the representatives of all the members. The responsibility of these members is to monitor the operations of the WTO agreement. It also facilitates the settlement of disputes, and it meets several times in a year at the Geneva headquarters. WTO also consists of the Council for Trade in Goods, the Council for Trade and Services, and the Council for Trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights that operate under the General Council. Apart from it, it has a Committee on Trade and Development, a Committee on Balance of Payment Restrictions, a Committee on Budget, and a Committee on Finance and Administration. The structure of WTO also consists of the Secretariat, which is headed by the Director General. Now, it is based in Geneva and has around 600 staff. The Director General appoints the members of the staff of the Secretariat, and the Director General also presents Committee on Budget, Finance and Administration. To improve the standards of living of the people, to ensure full employment in the member countries, to increase production and trade of goods and services, to extend positive efforts designed to ensure the growth of developing countries, and to ensure optimum utilization of the world's resources, to protect the global environment and to accept the concept of sustainable development, to reduce the tariffs and other barriers, and to eliminate discriminatory treatment in international trade agreements, and to achieve these objectives by entering into mutually advantageous arrangements. It facilitates the implementation, administration, and operation of the objectives of the agreements. It provides a forum for negotiations concerning the multilateral trade agreements among the member countries, and it also provides a forum to decide on the future strategies related to the trade and tariff. It facilitates the implementation, administration, and operation of the multilateral and bilateral agreements of the world trade. It administers the understanding of rules and regulations related to the dispute settlement. It facilitates with the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development in establishing a coherence in the universal economic policy determination. Now, let us throw some light on the different agreements of the World Trade Organization. The Multilateral Agreement on Trade and Goods. Now, the General Agreement on Trade in Goods include the following. The GATT 1994 that ensures transparency of legal rights and obligations, transparency of the activities of state trading enterprises, understanding the provisions of the balance of payments of the GATT criteria, understanding the procedures of new custom unions or free trade areas, and understanding the new procedures for negotiation of compensation when the tariff bindings are modified. Agreement on agriculture that relates to the domestic subsidies, export subsidies, minimum market access commitment, domestic support, sanitary and food aid operations. Now, agreement on textile and clothing. It was concerned with the securing of integration of textiles and clothing sector into the GATT 1994, and it was to improve the market access, ensure the application policies relating to the fair trading conditions as well as to avoid discrimination against imports. Agreement on technical barriers to trade. It ensured negotiations and standards as well as testing and certification procedures to avoid obstacles to trade. Agreement on trade related aspects of investment measures or TRIMs. It is related to the investment in identified areas, export obligations and the use of local raw materials. Agreement on anti-dumping, which is concerned with the right of the contracting parties to apply anti-dumping measures. Now, they opt for these measures when the dumped imports negatively affect the importing countries. The General Agreement on Trade in Services. This agreement covers all the services in the international trade, and it includes the special conditions that are related to individual sectors. Now, these sectors include the financial services, telecommunications, aircrafts, etc. And under this agreement, the governments have agreed to set up a professional services and working parties. They examine, report and recommend on the relationship between the trade in services and environment. Agreement on trade related aspects of intellectual property rights or TRIPS. This covers 7 categories of intellectual property, that is the copyright and the related rights, trademarks, geographical indications, industrial designs, patents, integrated circuits and trade secrets. Dispute settlement system, which is concerned with the consultation and the settlement of disputes between members concerning their rights and obligations established under the provisions of agreement of the WTO. The plurilateral trade agreements, which is concerned with the agreement on trade in civil aircraft, government procedure, international dairy agreement and international bovine meat agreement. The trade policy review mechanism or the TRPM, which aims to carry out the reviews on trade policy and practices for the smooth functioning of the multilateral trading systems. It establishes Trade Policy Review Body or the TPRB to achieve full transparency. The first meeting of the WTO took place at the Suntec City in Singapore in 1996, and the ministers of the member countries reached a consensus that includes a fair and equitable and an open rule based system. Progressive liberalization of trade in goods and services, elimination of tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade in goods, rejection of all forms of protectionism, elimination of discriminatory treatment in international trade relation, and integration of developing and the least developed countries into a multilateral system, maximum possible transparency. However, this meeting was criticized as the developing countries were being marginalized in the decision-making process. The second meeting was held in Seattle in 1999, in which a comprehensive round of negotiations took place regarding the investment issues, competition policies and transparency in the government procedures, trade and labor standards, etc. However, no conclusions could be reached and WTO was declared as a rich men's club like GATT. In spite of all this, WTO has been functioning actively with time. It was originally created as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or the IBRD, in 1944. The World Bank was established in 1945 under the Bretton Woods Agreement that took place in 1944. Its headquarters is located in Washington, and the initial mission of the bank was to finance Europe's economy by providing low interest rates. However, the United States lent money to European nations under the Marshall Plan, and as a result of this, the World Bank turned its attention to the third world countries. The bank in the 1950s favored power sector projects such as the power stations, road buildings, transportations, etc. And later in 1960s, it lent its support to agriculture, education, population control and urban development. The bank lends money under two schemes: the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or the IBRD scheme, under which the money is raised through bond sales in the international capital market. The borrowers have to pay what the bank calls the market rate of interest, which is the bank's cost of funds plus the market expenses. The scheme overseen by the International Development Association, or the IDA. The resources used to fund IDA loans are raised through subscriptions from wealthy members such as the United States, Japan and Germany, and the loans of the IDA go to the poorer countries as the borrowers have to repay an interest loans of less than 1% a year. Grants and interest-free loans are provided to the poorest nations. To assist in the construction and development of the territories of its members by facilitating investments of the capital for productive purposes. To encourage development of productive facilities and resources in the less developed countries, and to promote long-run balanced growth of international trade. To maintain balance of payment equilibrium by encouraging the international investments, and to provide finance for productive purposes either from its own resources or through borrowing or supplementing the private investments. To arrange loans for small and large projects that are useful and urgent, and to provide finance to the project from its own capital. To raise funds by participating with other members, and to provide advice and expertise by emphasizing more on the institutional technical assistance and infrastructure assistance. To invest in public through basic health and education, to focus on social development, governance and poverty alleviation, to support the governments to deliver quality services with greater efficiency and transparency, and to provide long run capital to member countries for economic reconstruction and development, to provide long run capital investments for assuring balance of payment equilibrium, and to provide guarantee for loans granted to small and large units and other projects of the member countries, to ensure the implementation of the development project, to smoothly transform a wartime economy to a peaceful economy, to promote capital investment in member countries, and to provide guarantee on private loans or capital investment. The members of International Monetary Fund are the members of the World Bank. It had a membership of 182 countries in the year 2000. In case if any country resigns from the membership, it is required to pay back all its loan with interests. It has a three-tier structure with the President, Executive Directors and the Board of Governors. The President is elected by the Executive Directors and presides over the meetings of Executive Directors once a year. The Executive Directors, the number of Executive Directors is 21, out of which 5 are appointed by the largest shareholders of the world. They are the US, UK, France, Germany and Japan. The rest 16 are elected by the Board of Governors, and the Executive Directors decide about the policy framework of the Article of Agreement as well as on the loan and credit proposals made by the President. The Board of Governors. They are the supreme body and are appointed by every member country for a period of 5 years, and the voting power of every governor is related to the financial contribution of its government. On June 30th, 1996, the authorized capital of the bank was $188 billion, out of which $180.6 billion, that is 96% of the total authorized capital, was issued to the member countries in the form of shares. Now, the authorized capital of the bank has been increasing from time to time with the approval of the member countries, and the member countries repay the share amount to the World Bank in different ways, out of which 2% are allotted share are repaid in the form of gold, US dollars or special drawing rights or the SDR. Now, the member country is free to repay 80% of its capital share in its own currency, and remaining 80% of their share has to be deposited by it only on demand by the World Bank. The basic objectives behind the funding strategy of the World Bank are as follows: to ensure the availability of funds to the bank, for which the bank maintains unutilized access to the funds in the markets in which it borrows; to minimize the effective cost of funds to its borrowers, and this is done by the currency mix of its borrowings and the time of borrowing; to control the volatility in the net income overall loan charges, and to provide an appropriate degree of maturity transformation between its borrowings and lendings. Maturity transformation is the bank's capacity to lend at longer maturity than it borrows. So, that was all for today. We end this episode here with the hope that you have understood the different topics covered today. Today we learned IMF, WTO and World Bank and the various aspects related to it. We will meet in the next episode with a new topic. Till then, take care and goodbye.